The first thing I registered wasn't the headache, but the thread count. My skin caught against sheets that were impossibly smooth, cooling the heat that radiated from my body. The air smelled different here, expensive sandalwood and the crisp, recycled chill of high-end climate control. I opened my eyes, expecting the beige neutrality of my standard corporate suite. Instead, I saw vaulted ceilings. I sat up, the room spinning with a heavy, rhythmic throb, and my hand brushed against a document on the mahogany nightstand. There, in black ink, was my signature. It was bold, unshakable. But the title above it didn't say partner. It said primary asset. Then the shower stopped running. I didn't scream. I didn't scramble for the sheets to cover myself. I am a negotiator. Panic is a liability I liquidated years ago. Instead, I assessed the terrain. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Strip, currently bleached pale by the ruthless desert sun. The furniture was bespoke, dark leather and chrome, arranged with a symmetry that bordered on obsessive. There were no personal photos, no clutter. This wasn't just a penthouse, it was a fortress, a command center designed for someone who viewed the world as a board to be arranged. "You're awake." The voice was low, smooth like expensive whiskey poured over ice. Skylar stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling around her ankles. She was wrapped in a white towel that she wore with the regal indifference of a queen in court. I knew the face, of course. Everyone in the industry knew Skylar. She didn't just run the casinos. She was the house. And the house always wins. What unsettled me wasn't her presence, but her calm. She wasn't angry. She looked at me with a terrifying, predatory patience. "What is this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady given the dryness in my throat. I held up the document. Skylar didn't blink. She walked to the dresser, picking up a heavy crystal carafe to pour water. "That," she said, turning to offer me the glass, "is the receipt." "Receipt?" I ignored the water, my professional defenses snapping into place. "I don't know what happened last night, but—" "Last night, you were collateral," she corrected gently. She moved with a fluid grace, closing the distance between us until she stood at the foot of the bed. "The poker game. You don't remember?" "I don't gamble," I said automatically. "And yet you thought you could outbluff a table full of oil tycoons," Skylar said, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "You were winning, until you weren't. You ran out of chips, so you put yourself on the table. Your skills, your time, your exclusivity." I closed my eyes, a fractured memory hitting me. The clink of chips, the heat of the room, the way Skylar had watched me from the shadows. Not playing, just observing, her gaze heavy on my skin. I would never sign a contract transferring agency. Intoxication voids consent. I can have this annulled before room service arrives, on grounds of diminished capacity. Skylar laughed, a dark, rich sound that vibrated in her chest. She set the water down and stepped around the side of the bed. "You could try, but read Clause 4.2. You insisted on adding it yourself. The asset retains autonomy of method, provided the objective is met. You weren't coerced, darling. You were arrogant." She moved then, faster than I expected, stepping right into my personal space. The scent of her, amber, steel, and clean skin, filled my senses, overriding the sandalwood. I stopped breathing. She wasn't threatening me. She was appraising me. She reached out, her fingers cool and firm, and placed two of them against the pulse point on my neck. It wasn't a caress. It was a measurement. "Your heart rate just jumped," she murmured, her eyes locking onto mine. They were dark, intelligent, and uncomfortably perceptive. "You're not afraid of the contract. You're intrigued by the stakes. You like the pressure." "I'm a professional," I managed, though my voice dropped, betraying me. "I don't work for free." "Oh, you're not free," Skylar said, her thumb brushing the hollow of my throat, sending a shiver straight down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You're the most expensive thing in the city. And today, I need that mind of yours sharp. We have a merger at noon, and I need an asset who can see the angles I can't." She pulled back, the loss of her touch leaving a sudden, cold void. "Prove you're worth the bet I made to cover your debt, and maybe I'll renegotiate the terms." Before I could argue, before I could tell her that I wasn't a prize to be won or an asset to be deployed, A chime sounded at the door. "That will be the stylist," Skylar said, dropping the towel with a casual indifference that left me breathless as she reached for a silk robe. "Get up, Asset. We have work to do." The double doors swept open, admitting a phalanx of assistants who moved with the frantic, terrified efficiency of people who knew exactly who signed their paychecks. They brought rolling racks of garment bags, trays of velvet-lined jewelry cases, and an air of nervous energy that clashed violently with the stillness Skylar had established. I watched them set up a portable vanity, my arms crossed, trying to reclaim some semblance of my usual authority. I was used to being the one commanding the room, the one deciding the timeline. Here, I was merely the subject. Skylar watched them for exactly 30 seconds. She stood by the window, the silk robe tied loosely around her waist, sipping her water like she was tasting the quality of the glass rather than the liquid. "Leave the emerald," she said, her voice cutting through the rustle of fabric. "And the diamond choker. Take the rest." The lead stylist froze, holding a hanger midair. "Ms. Vance, the schedule allows for—" "I know the schedule," Skylar said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I wrote it. Leave the room." The exit was faster than the entrance. Within moments, the suite was silent again, save for the hum of the city below and the sudden, sharp awareness of how little space existed between us. The emerald dress hung on the rack like a challenge. It was a slip of silk so dark it looked like deep water, structured with an architectural precision that promised no forgiveness for flaws. "I can dress myself," I said, reaching for the hanger. "I'm sure you can," Skylar replied, stepping between me and the silk. "But that's not part of the service package today." She took the dress from me. The gesture was possessive, not polite. "Turn around." My instinct was to negotiate, to establish boundaries, but the contract and the lingering heat of her earlier touch held me in place. I turned. I heard the slide of fabric, the rustle of the robe as she moved closer. I stepped into the dress, the silk pooling cool and heavy against my skin, instantly molding to the heat of my body. It was backless, plunging dangerously low, exposing the line of my spine to the air, and to her. "Hold your hair," she commanded softly. I swept my hair up, exposing my neck. Skylar didn't zip it immediately. I felt her presence behind me, a wall of warmth radiating against my back. She was close enough that I could hear the subtle intake of her breath. She traced the line of my spine with a single knuckle, starting at the base and dragging it slowly, agonizingly upward. The touch was precise, calculated to spark a reaction, and my body betrayed me instantly, a shiver racing across my skin that had nothing to do with the cold. "You carry so much tension here," she murmured, her hand flattening against my shoulder blade, her thumb digging into the muscle with a pressure that bordered on pain, but settled firmly into pleasure. "Relax. The table smells fear, and right now, you reek of it." "It's not fear," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "It's anticipation." "Is that what we're calling it?" She pulled the zipper up. The sound was a slow rasp, loud in the quiet room. As the metal teeth locked together, encasing me in the silk, she leaned in. Her lips brushed the sensitive skin just below my ear. Not a kiss, but a ghost of one. A promise of what could happen if the world wasn't watching. "There. Perfect fit." She stepped away to retrieve the necklace. It was a string of diamonds, heavy and cold, the kind of piece that cost more than the annual GDP of a small nation. She fastened it around my throat, her fingers lingering on the clasp, the weight of the stones settling against my collarbones like a physical claim. She turned me to face the mirror. The woman staring back was familiar, but sharpened. The dress didn't just cover me, it presented me. It was designed to draw the eye, to distract, to seduce. I met Skylar's eyes in the reflection. She was standing just behind me, her dark eyes scanning the image we made together. "You look like a distraction," Skylar said. She rested her hands on my shoulders, her grip firm, grounding. The playfulness vanished from her face, replaced by that terrifying, brilliant intensity. "The man we're meeting today thinks with his ego. He sees a beautiful woman, and he stops counting the cards. He'll look at you, see the dress, see the diamonds, and assume you're just decoration." She leaned closer, her cheek almost touching mine, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my knees weak. "That's when you gut him. I don't need arm candy, Asset. I can buy pretty things anywhere. I need your brain. I need you to see the numbers he's hiding while he's too busy staring at your neckline. It was a manipulation, and we both knew it. She was objectifying me and validating me in the same breath, playing my vanity against my professional pride. And God help me, it was working. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a sharp, dangerous desire to prove her right. "I'll get you your deal," I said, watching her pupils dilate in the mirror. "I know you will," Skylar said, stepping back and breaking the spell. "Now let's go. The elevator is waiting, and I hate to keep my money waiting." The private elevator didn't just descend, it plunged, dropping us from the hermetically sealed silence of the penthouse into the belly of the beast. When the gold-plated doors slid open, the sound hit me like a physical wave, a chaotic symphony of ringing slot machines, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, and the rhythmic, synthetic thrum of house music designed to keep heart rates elevated. The air here was different, too. It was heavy with oxygen, cheap perfume, and the metallic tang of desperation. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, the sheer volume of humanity overwhelming after the calculated intimacy of the room upstairs. Skylar didn't hesitate. She stepped out onto the plush carpet, her spine straight, her presence instantly commanding the attention of the nearest security detail. Then she reached for me. It wasn't a hold, it was a brand. Her hand settled on the small of my back, right where the silk of the dress gave way to bare skin. Her palm was warm, firm, and possessive. The contact sent a jolt through my nervous system that nearly made me stumble in my heels. She wasn't just guiding me through the crowd, she was steering me. With that single point of contact, she signaled to every pit boss, dealer, and high roller in the vicinity that I was with her. I wasn't a tourist. I wasn't a guest. I was hers. "Head up," Skylar murmured, her voice low enough that only I could hear it over the din of a roulette wheel. "Walk like you own the place. Or at least, walk like you own the woman who does." I straightened, matching her stride. We cut through the main floor like a shark fin through water. The crowd parted instinctively. I felt eyes on me, heavy, assessing glances that lingered on the diamonds at my throat and the exposed line of my back. Usually, that kind of scrutiny makes my skin crawl, making me feel decorative and dismissed. But with Skylar's hand burning against my skin, guiding me with subtle, pressure-based cues, the attention felt different. It felt like envy. We approached a roped-off area near the high-limit slots, where a small group of men in Italian suits were holding court. At the center was Marcus Thorne, a rival mogul whose casinos were known for being louder, tackier, and significantly less profitable than Skylar's. He held a champagne flute like a weapon, laughing at something one of his sycophants had said. When he saw Skylar, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Skylar," he greeted, his voice booming. "I heard you were restructuring. Didn't realize that meant hiring models to distract from the quarterly reports." His gaze raked over me, dismissive and crude. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at the necklace, then the dress, categorizing me instantly as expense rather than investment. Skylar's hand tightened imperceptibly on my back. "Thorne, I see you're still confusing volume with value." Thorne laughed, dismissive. "Value is simple math, Skylar. My floor traffic is up 20% since the renovation. Your exclusive model is bleeding potential. You're holding on to prime real estate with a yield that barely covers the overhead. I've run the probability. Your house edge on the new VIP tables is statistically insignificant compared to the volume I'm pulling." I felt Skylar tense, ready to strike back with a sharp retort. But the numbers hung in the air, incorrect and offensive to my professional sensibilities. The fear of the crowd vanished, replaced by the cold, comforting clarity of arithmetic. "Your probability model is flawed," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Thorne blinked, looking at me for the first time. Really looking at me. "Excuse me?" "You're conflating traffic with yield," I stated, my voice cutting through the noise with practiced projection. "Volume is up 20%, yes, but your average spend per head is down 40 because you alienated the whales to court the tourists. And regarding Skylar's VIP tables, the house edge isn't the primary revenue stream there. It's the ancillary liquidity. The retention rate of her high net worth clients is 92%. Yours is hovering around 60. You're churning customers. She's cultivating portfolios. Statistically, her floor is printing money, while yours is just making noise." Thorne's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his assistant, who was frantically typing on a tablet, looking pale. I didn't look at Thorne. I looked at Skylar. The transformation in her was visceral. The polite, frozen mask she wore for the public had cracked, revealing a hunger that had nothing to do with business. Her eyes were dark, dilated, fixed on my face with an intensity that made the air between us crackle. She wasn't just pleased. She was aroused. She stepped closer, eliminating the professional distance entirely. Her hand slid from my back to my waist, pulling me into her side. She leaned down, her lips brushing the shell of my ear, her breath hot against my skin. "God," she whispered, the word vibrating against my neck. "There is nothing sexier than watching you destroy a man with a spreadsheet." She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, a smirk playing on her lips that promised rewards I wasn't sure I was ready to collect. "Let's go to the lounge, Asset. I think we're done playing with the children." The VIP lounge was a different kind of theater. Here, the air was scrubbed clean of the desperate hope that permeated the main floor, replaced by the heavy, stagnant scent of cigar smoke, aged scotch, and inevitability. The lighting was low, amber, and intimate, designed to hide sweat and highlight the glint of gold watches. The noise of the slot machines was gone, replaced by the soft, rhythmic shuffle of cards and the clinking of ice. We sat side by side at the mahogany table. The leather chair was cool against my bare back, but to my left, the heat radiating from Skylar was a furnace. The game was Texas Hold'em, but the chips were just placeholders for zoning permits on the North Strip. Across from us sat a man named Sterling, old Vegas, heavy-set, with eyes that had seen everything and valued nothing. He looked at us with the weary condescension of a man who believed women belonged on the menu, not at the table. "New luck charm, Skylar?" Sterling asked, flicking a glance at the diamonds around my throat. "Pretty. Does she speak or just sparkle?" "She counts," Skylar said, her voice bored. She didn't look at him. She looked at her cards. Under the table, in the shadow of the heavy drape, Skylar shifted. Her leg moved against mine. It wasn't an accident. She pressed her knee firmly against my thigh, a constant, solid line of pressure that grounded me. The friction of the silk between our skin created a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. She was using me to steady herself, yes, but she was also testing me, daring me to lose focus. But I didn't. The proximity only sharpened my mind. In a room full of smoke and mirrors, that point of contact was the only thing that felt real. It was a silent conversation, a tether keeping me from floating away into the abstraction of the numbers. I focused on Sterling. I didn't look at his cards. I looked at his carotid artery. I watched the minute twitch of the muscle in his jaw. I tracked the dilation of his pupils as the flop came down. Queen of hearts, 2 of spades, 7 of diamonds. We fell into a rhythm that felt less like gambling and more like dancing. She provided the capital and the terrifying charisma. I provided the probability matrix. I watched the table, she watched me. Every time I signaled, a shift of my weight, a tap of a finger, she executed the play with lethal precision. It was intoxicating. For the first time in my career, I wasn't just the smartest person in the room, I was the weapon of the most powerful one. Sterling bet big, aggressive. He wanted to bully the table. My heart rate remained steady, anchored by the pressure of Skylar's leg against mine. I watched Sterling's hands, the slight tremor when he pushed the chips, the way his eyes flicked to the dealer. He was overcompensating. He was bluffing. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I rested my hand on the green felt, just inches from Skylar's stack of chips. I tapped my index finger twice, a microscopic movement. Skylar didn't hesitate. She didn't question me. She didn't even look at me to confirm. She simply reached out and pushed her entire stack into the center. "All in," she said, her voice smooth as velvet. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sterling stared at her. Then he stared at me. He looked for fear, for the hesitation of a bluff. He found only the blank, polished surface of my professional mask and the predatory stillness of the woman beside me. He folded. Skylar raked in the pot, millions in implied value sliding across the felt with a satisfying clatter. The tension in the room broke, dissolving into the murmur of the dealer clearing the cards. Under the table, the dynamic shifted. Skylar's hand dropped from the table edge. It found my thigh, her fingers curling into the silk of the dress, squeezing hard. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was triumphant. It was adrenaline transferred through skin. Her thumb rubbed a slow, possessive circle against my leg, high up, dangerously close to the hem. I stopped breathing for a second, the sudden spike of heat in my belly warring with the cool satisfaction of the win. "Gentlemen," Skylar said, standing up and taking her winnings and her hand away, leaving my skin burning in the absence of her touch. "It's been a pleasure taking your property, but I believe my asset and I have something to celebrate." She turned to me, her eyes dark with a shared secret. And God, the rush was better than any drink. "Come," she commanded, extending a hand to me. "Fresh air." The heavy glass door slid shut behind us, severing the noise of the casino floor like a guillotine. The sudden silence was jarring, ringing in my ears almost as loudly as the slots had moments before. We were high up now, suspended above the neon arteries of the Strip on a private terrace that jutted out into the desert night. The air here was different, less recycled, carrying the dry, dusty scent of the Mojave cooling rapidly under the dark sky, mixed with the faint, chemical sweetness of distant pool water. Skylar didn't look at the view. She walked to the railing and leaned against it, her posture shifting in a way I hadn't seen since I woke up. The rigid, imperial straightness of her spine softened. Her shoulders dropped. She exhaled a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire empire she managed downstairs. For the first time all day, she didn't look like a titan of industry or a predator hunting for weakness. She just looked tired. I stayed near the door, watching her. The adrenaline from the poker table was fading, leaving behind a humming clarity. I should have been planning my exit strategy. I should have been drafting the legal arguments to void the contract the moment we were back in neutral territory. But my feet remained planted on the cool stone. "You're analyzing me again," Skylar said. She didn't turn around, but her voice held a smile, softer now, stripped of the performance she put on for the men in suits. "I'm observing a variable shift," I corrected, walking slowly toward her. The wind whipped the silk of my dress around my legs. "You drop the armor when the audience leaves." Skylar turned then, resting her elbows on the railing behind her. The lights of the city cast her in silhouette, catching the sharp line of her jaw and the curve of her throat. "The armor is heavy," she admitted quietly, "and the audience is exhausting. They see the money, the power, the gender. They never see the work. They think I won that hand because I got lucky." "You didn't get lucky," I said, stopping a foot away from her. "You engineered the outcome." Skylar looked at me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "We engineered it." She reached out, her hand closing around my wrist. It wasn't the commanding grip she'd used on the casino floor. It was an anchor. She pulled me in, not roughly, but with an inexorable gravity I had no desire to resist. I stepped forward until I was standing between her legs, the proximity electric. "I've spent 10 years building this," she murmured, her thumb tracing the pulse point on the inside of my wrist. 10 years of smiling at men who wanted to buy me or break me. Tonight was the first time I sat at a table and felt like I wasn't fighting alone. She pulled me closer still, until my back pressed against the cold iron of the railing. She effectively boxed me in, her body heat radiating through the thin silk of my dress. This was a position of vulnerability, trapped against a ledge hundreds of feet in the air, but it didn't feel like entrapment. It felt like being chosen. "You enjoyed it," Skylar whispered. It wasn't a question. She leaned in, her face inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in her irises, the faint smudge of fatigue under her eyes that made her devastatingly human. "I felt your heart rate when we took the pot. You liked being the weapon." "I liked the efficiency," I lied, though my breath hitched as her hand slid up my arm to cut my neck. "Liar," she breathed, her lips brushing my jawline. "You liked belonging to the house." I closed my eyes, the truth of it hitting me harder than the desert wind. She was right. For years, my career had been a series of lonely victories, walking into hostile rooms, dismantling arguments, leaving before the champagne was popped. I was respected, but I was solitary. Tonight, under Skylar's hand, I had been part of something. I had been an extension of her will, and she had been the amplifier for my intellect. "The contract," I managed to say, my voice trembling as her fingers threaded into the hair at the nape of my neck. Clause 4.2. Skylar pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. Her expression was open, raw in a way that terrified me more than her anger ever could. "Forget the contract," she murmured. "I didn't want to own you, darling. I just wanted to know if there was fire under all that ice. I wanted to see if you'd stay if I gave you a reason. You gambled everything on a bluff, I whispered. I bet on us, she corrected. Did I win? She leaned in, her gaze dropping to my lips. The air between us was so charged it felt like a physical weight. I realized then that I didn't want to renegotiate. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to see what happened when the bluff turned into a promise. A sharp, piercing wail cut through the air. Skylar froze. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by the steel mask of the casino queen. She pulled back, her head snapping toward the glass doors as the red emergency strobes began to pulse in the suite behind us. Security breach, she said, her voice ice cold. Thorn. The transition from the balcony's quiet intimacy to the suite's chaotic red pulse was violent. Skylar didn't hesitate. She didn't explain. She grabbed my hand, her grip bruising, and pulled me away from the glass, moving with the terrifying efficiency of a woman who had drilled for this exact nightmare. Safe room, she ordered, her voice stripping away any trace of the lover who had just been holding me. Now. She dragged me toward a panel in the wall that was already sliding open, revealing a steel-reinforced sanctuary. It was instinct, pure, unadulterated protection. She was trying to bury her treasure to keep it safe. I stopped. I dug my heels into the plush carpet and wrenched my arm back. No, I said. Skylar spun around, eyes blazing. This isn't a negotiation, Asset. Thorn isn't playing poker anymore. He's escalating. He's not sending gunmen, I countered, pointing at the wall-mounted monitors that had come alive with cascading streams of data. Look at the traffic spikes. He's not attacking the building. He's attacking the liquidity. If I go into that box, you lose the merger capital in 3 minutes. I didn't wait for her permission. I moved to the command desk in the center of the room, the silk of my dress rustling against the leather chair as I sat. The screen was a mess of red alerts, denial of service attacks masking a precision strike on the escrow accounts. Thorn was trying to void the deal by draining the proof of funds before the midnight verification. I can reroute the capital through the Cayman subsidiaries, I said, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. But I need your authorization codes. Now, Skylar. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. She looked at the safe room, then at me. It was the pivotal moment, the choice between keeping me as a possession to be guarded or unleashing me as a weapon to be used. She chose the weapon. She stepped up behind me, leaning over the chair, her body a solid wall of heat against my back. Alpha 709, she recited, her voice steady, right in my ear. I typed it in. Access granted. The room became a pressure cooker. While I fought the digital siege, building firewalls out of shell corporations and legal injunctions, Skylar managed the physical perimeter. She was on her comms, barking orders to her security chief, coordinating the lockdown of the elevators and the casino floor. Lock the south entrance, she commanded, one hand resting on the back of my chair, her thumb digging into the leather. If anyone without a badge steps off that floor, drop them. This was different than the poker table. That had been a game. This was war. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I felt the rush of it, the absolute, crystal-clear focus that comes when the stakes are life and death. I wasn't just an asset she had acquired. I was the firewall keeping her empire from burning. He's pivoting, I said, watching the code shift. He's trying to trigger a default clause in the contract. He wants to make you look insolvent. Buy me 2 minutes, Skylar said, her voice tight. I'll give you 4, I replied. I executed a reverse loop through a holding company in Singapore, creating a digital hall of mirrors that would keep Thorn's algorithms chasing ghosts for hours. Capital is secured. The funds are showing as verified. I hit the final key. The red cascades on the screen froze, then flickered to a steady, calm green. The alarms cut out instantly, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. The threat was neutralized. The house was still standing. I slumped back in the chair, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. My hands were shaking now. I stared at the green screen, breathing hard. Skylar didn't move away. She stood there, her hands still gripping the chair, her breathing matching mine in the quiet room. She leaned down, resting her forehead against the side of my head. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The tension radiating off her was no longer fear. It was awe. You didn't hide, she whispered, the words vibrating against my temple. I told you, I said, turning my head to look up at her, meeting that fierce, dark gaze. I'm not a trophy. I don't sit on a shelf while the house burns down. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the shift. She wasn't looking at an asset anymore. She was looking at a partner. The silence that followed the green screen wasn't empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the residual energy of survival. My hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer electric crash of adrenaline leaving my system. I stood up, the leather chair groaning softly, and the sound seemed deafening in the sudden quiet of the command center. Skylar watched me from the shadows of the room. She hadn't moved. She was leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk, her arms crossed over the silk of her robe, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that matched mine perfectly. "You gave me the codes," I said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation of insanity. "Alpha 709. That's not just a password, Skylar. That's the master key to the kingdom. I could have drained the accounts. I could have transferred everything to an offshore shell in the Caymans and walked out of here owning your entire life." Skylar pushed off the desk. She walked toward me, slow and deliberate, closing the distance until the heat of her body washed over the chill of the air conditioning. "But you didn't." "I could have," I insisted, needing her to understand the magnitude of the risk she had just taken. "In my world, you don't hand a loaded gun to a stranger." "You're not a stranger," Skylar said softly. She reached out, her fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead, her touch startlingly gentle after the violence of the last hour. "I've been watching you for 3 years." I froze, the air leaving my lungs. "What?" "The merger in Tokyo," she recited, her eyes locking onto mine, dark and intense. "You dismantled the opposition in 40 minutes without raising your voice. The acquisition in London. You found the hidden debt in the ledger that 3 audit firms missed. I was in the back of the room for that one, watching you work." I stared at her, the pieces of the night falling into a terrifying, flattering alignment. This wasn't an accident. The poker game, the debt, the contract. You didn't just stumble upon me. "I engineered it," she confessed. And there was no shame in her voice, only a raw, naked honesty. "I knew you were in town for the convention. I knew where you'd be. I sat at that table and waited for you to walk by because I knew, the moment you saw the reckless way I was betting, you wouldn't be able to resist stepping in. You can't stand bad math." "You manipulated me," I whispered. But the anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a strange, blooming warmth in my chest. "I created an opportunity," Skylar corrected. She turned and walked toward the bed, the movement fluid and weary. She sat on the edge of the mattress, the white silk pooling around her hips. For the first time, she looked up at me. The visual hit me hard. Skylar Vance, the casino queen, the woman who made billionaires beg for scraps of her attention, was sitting at my feet, looking up with an expression of absolute devotion. It flipped the entire power dynamic of the last 12 hours on its head. She wasn't commanding me anymore. She was offering herself to me. "I spend my life surrounded by people who want things from me," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "Money, access, power. Last night, I wanted to meet the only woman who might actually be smart enough to take it all, but principled enough not to. I wanted to know if you were real." She reached out, grabbing my hand and pulling me a step closer, until my knees brushed against hers between the slit of her robe. "And then you stood in that war room and defended my empire like it was your own blood. You didn't just prove you were real, Asset. You proved you were necessary." My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at her, seeing the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes, the vulnerability she had hidden behind diamonds and bluffs. "I'm not your asset," I said, my voice shaking. "No," Skylar agreed, pressing a kiss to the palm of my hand, her eyes fluttering shut against my skin. "You're the only person in this city who sees me. Not the bank account. Me." I watched her, the fierce protector of the last hour, melting into a woman who just didn't want to be alone at the top anymore. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. I wasn't leaving. I couldn't. Behind us, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the sky began to bruise with purple and gold. The sun was cresting over the desert mountains, bleeding light into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us, like tiny, suspended wagers. The night was over. The game was done. But as the first ray of morning hit the diamonds still around my neck, refracting into 1,000 tiny rainbows across her skin, I knew the real negotiation was just beginning. The wild night was finished, but the morning brought something far more dangerous. Hope. The morning light didn't ask for permission. It simply invaded. It flooded the suite with a brilliance that was unforgiving, washing away the noir atmosphere of the night and leaving us exposed in high definition. The neon glow of the strip was gone, replaced by the stark, bleached reality of the desert sun. In this light, the penthouse didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a home that was too large for one person. I stood by the nightstand, looking down at the document that had started this entire cascade. Primary asset. The word seemed ridiculous now, a legal fiction designed to mask a personal desperation. The paper was heavy, cream-colored stock. Skylar didn't do anything halfway, even when she was bluffing. Skylar was still sitting on the edge of the bed, the silk robe slipping off one shoulder. She was watching me with that same intensity she'd had at the poker table, but the predator was gone. In her place was a woman waiting for the other shoe to drop. She expected me to run. She expected the daylight to bring regret. I picked up the contract. It felt cool and smooth under my fingertips. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "is a liability." Skylar tilted her head, a flicker of uncertainty in her dark eyes. It was a placeholder. "It's a barrier," I corrected. "It implies ownership. It implies that my value is something you can depreciate over a fiscal year. It suggests a hierarchy." I didn't break eye contact as I took the thick paper in both hands. The sound of it tearing was sharp, violent, and incredibly satisfying. A sudden rip that echoed in the quiet room. I didn't stop at once. I tore it again and again, until the primary asset clause was nothing more than confetti raining down onto the expensive carpet. "Contract voided," I stated, dusting my hands off. Skylar stood up then. She moved slowly, stepping over the debris of her bluff. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Not the practiced smirk of the casino queen, but something softer, dangerously hopeful. "So," she murmured, stopping just inches from me, close enough that I could smell the lingering scent of her skin, amber and the faint metallic tang of adrenaline. "Does this mean the merger is off?" "No," I said, holding her gaze. "It means we renegotiate. I don't sign blank checks, Skylar, and I don't work for bosses." "I don't want a boss," she countered softly. She reached out, her hand settling on my waist, warm and heavy through the silk of the dress I was still wearing. "And I certainly don't want an employee. I have thousands of those. They're boring. They tell me what I want to hear." "I'll never tell you what you want to hear," I promised. "I'll tell you the risk. I'll tell you when you're being arrogant." "Good," she breathed, pulling me closer until our bodies were flush against each other. "That's clause 1. What's clause 2? "Equal equity," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs as her thumb brushed the bare skin of my back. "No more asset. No more mine. We are partners. We share the risk. We share the reward. And if the house burns down, we stand in the ashes together." Skylar's eyes darkened. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. "I'm offering more than equity, darling. I'm offering the whole portfolio. My heart, my city, my bed. You want 50%? Take 100. It was the best deal I had ever been offered. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to run the probability matrix. "Accepted," I whispered. Skylar smiled, a expression that was purely open and seductive, stripping away my last defenses. "Then let's seal it with coffee." The champagne gave me a headache. We moved to the balcony, stepping out into the morning air. It was cooler now, the desert breeze carrying the scent of sage instead of exhaust. We stood side by side, hands clasped on the railing, watching the city wake up below us. It looked different in the daylight, less magical perhaps, but more real. It wasn't a kingdom of dreams anymore. It was just a city we could rule. Skylar squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the shift. The gamble had paid off. The bluff had become the truth. "The view is better today," she noted quietly. "It is," I agreed, looking not at the skyline, but at her profile. We turned back toward the room, leaving the noise of the world behind us. The door clicked shut, sealing us in, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that the wild night was over, but the life we were building was just beginning. 3 months later, the air on the casino floor still smelled of ozone, cheap perfume, and desperation. But it no longer smelled like danger to me. It smelled like pure opportunity. The cacophony of ringing slot machines and the rhythmic shuffle of cards wasn't noise anymore. It was the heartbeat of a living organism. And I was truly one of the 2 people holding the defibrillator. We stepped out of the private elevator, the gold doors sliding shut behind us with a heavy, final thud. This time, there was no hand on the small of my back steering me. Skylar walked beside me, her stride matching mine absolutely perfectly. She wore a tailored tuxedo jacket with sharp satin lapels and nothing underneath, a look that balanced lethal professionalism with distracting sensuality. I wore midnight blue, a structured silhouette that announced I was there to work, not to watch. The security detail trailed us at a respectful distance, creating a perimeter of silence in the chaos. The pit bosses didn't just nod at Skylar anymore, they nodded at us. The Vance and Associates memo had gone out weeks ago, but the real confirmation was right here, in the way we moved. We weren't a queen and her consort. We were a binary star system, 2 gravitational forces moving in absolute, perfect sync. We paused at the very edge of the high-stakes baccarat pit. The dealer, a man who had once looked through me like I was mere glass, now paused his shuffle to acknowledge my presence. I caught a glimpse of Marcus Thorne across the room near the VIP bar. He looked visibly tired, his suit a little less crisp, his laugh a little too loud. He raised a glass to us, a gesture of surrender from a defeated man who knew he'd been outmaneuvered. "He knows," Skylar murmured, her voice low and intimate, meant only for me. She wasn't looking at Thorne. She was watching my reaction to him. "He knows the zoning commission approved our expansion into his parking lot this morning." "He should," I replied, keeping my face impassive. "I sent him the courtesy notification exactly 5 minutes ago. The probability of him liquidating his assets before Q4 is now 89%. Skylar turned to me. The predatory hunger was still there in her eyes, but the loneliness that had shadowed it was gone. She reached out, sliding her hand into mine, interlocking our fingers. It was a public claim, bolder than the hand on the back had ever been. It said we were a unit. It said the asset had become the architect. The heat of her palm against mine grounded me, a constant reminder that while the numbers might fluctuate, the loyalty we had forged in the fire of that first night was immutable. "You are terrifying," she whispered, a smile curling the corner of her mouth. "It is my favorite thing about you." "I had a good teacher," I said, squeezing her hand. "No," Skylar corrected, stepping closer until her shoulder brushed mine. "You were always this dangerous. You just needed a bigger table to play at." I looked out over the sea of lights and spinning wheels. I realized then that the old adage was wrong. Vegas didn't have to be a place where you lost yourself. For me, it was the place where I found the only thing I couldn't calculate. A partner who saw the fire behind the ice. I hadn't just survived the wild night. I had built a kingdom in the morning. Skylar leaned in, her lips grazing my ear. "Upstairs? I have a new acquisition strategy I want to discuss. It involves the balcony and absolutely no business talk." "I'll clear my schedule," I promised. The elevator doors swept open, and the distant sound of a roulette ball finally dropping into a slot echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. I looked at our reflection, 2 women standing tall against the gold. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was the house. And the house always wins, especially when it's built for 2. If you're ready to go all in on a love like this one, subscribe and hit the bell. You don't want to miss the next winning hand we deal.